All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Asbiel, Guildmaster of the Guild of Legends, located in the heart of the multiverse, and we've decided to change things up a bit tonight. Instead of doing our intended stream of Project Zomboid, since I played a little bit of that earlier in the week, we are instead jumping into the One D&D playtest materials for character origins, which I've got pulled up right here. Um, so I have skimmed through this, but I haven't done like a full, like a thorough read through it and all of that stuff. So I figured, it's a good opportunity. It's pretty recent, just came out last week that they put this up, and people have been talking about it. So I thought I would just jump into it and start going through it a little bit. And should we need it, I've also pulled up the D&D Beyond website here, just so that if we want to reference or compare anything, I can do that pretty easily there. But the main focus is this PDF right here that we'll be using to, get all this information. Since it's still such early playtest material, even though they have D&D Beyond formatted to have a section for all of this stuff in the same way that they would have a section for any of the other official releases. They currently have that just direct you to a download link instead of anything that instead of giving like the digital version of it. So right now the best that we can do is the PDF, but not a problem. I am looking forward to them eventually, hopefully, in the time that they're testing out this content, put it live on D&D Beyond where it can be viewed in that format and possibly used in playtest characters. But for the time being, it's probably going to be a bit at the very least before they do anything like that. So. As I mentioned, I've kind of skimmed through this already. Basically, I kind of went through and looked for a few key points of interest that I was curious about when it initially came out, and just kind of skipped over the bulk of it. But it is about the character origins. I think it's pretty good starting point. Because I mean the way that I learned how to play D&D 5e initially was by making characters. Character creation is always the way I get into TTRPGs first. So I figure they made the right call in putting this out before any other content. And it's also the most, I think, immediately usable stuff as well. If people are jumping into one-shots and things like that, they can pretty easily slip these character options, these character origin content into their characters to test them out in live play with normal 5e games. So, just right out the gate here, starting at the top, it kind of just seems to explain some basics about how the playtest goes and everything like that. One thing that stands out is this section on the power level, which is good to keep aware of anytime they do a playtest. I'm sure when they're creating their content, they have a general idea of roughly how strong they want to make the content, and then they probably. I would be surprised if there wasn't some level of internal testing on content that they put out. But then, really, there is no better testing ground than the I don't even know how many people play D&D 5e currently, but just the amount of people that they can put this out to openly and get feedback from. That's why so often you'll see stuff go out in their Unearthed Arcana playtests, and then when it eventually does get published, if it does, they are changed and tweaked quite a bit based on that playtesting, and ends up a lot of the time being feeling generally weaker than a lot of the playtest materials. So it seems like their common their common route is to maybe kind of err in favor of stronger, and then kind of tone it down as playtests go on. So I wouldn't be surprised if, as we go through this, a lot of the things seem maybe a touch stronger than you would expect normally. Obviously, there's only so much that's so strong that certain things can be individually. You know, people talk about like strong races and stuff like that, but then things like backgrounds and stuff like that doesn't really have that same impact on your characters in D&D 5e. But maybe we'll see some differences here, because this is a bit of a change from how 5e has worked to some degree. Yeah, inside we'll find the following content: character races, race options being considered for the player's handbook. Definitely a lot of people complain about the power creep with the new stuff with respect to existing 5e campaigns. Yep. And I think that it again falls in line with what you'll see just about any time they put out an Unearthed Arcana playtest material. So I'm always interested to see the playtest and then to see how it turns out if and when it does get published. But moving further here, character backgrounds, starting languages, feats, and a rules glossary. So when I looked at this, I kind of skimmed over the races very briefly, and I pretty much immediately jumped to the rules glossary at, I believe, near the end of the, near the end of the playtest release here, because I was curious to see how some of those things were changed up and all of that. And I'm excited to get back to that and look at it a little bit more thoroughly, because in discussing some of the bits that I've looked at very briefly with others, I feel like I didn't have the clearest idea of what I was looking at, because I didn't get the full picture of the whole thing. And then here another sidebar explaining that this is playtest material. It's drafts. It's not the fully refined, so on. So just some things to keep in mind as people are looking at this content. One second here. All right. So determining your origin after choosing character's class. It's time to consider character's origin. That's something interesting that they talk about character creation with the class being picked first. Because I have never gone that route. I've always felt like I pick maybe the background first a lot of the time. So it's interesting though. I think a lot of people do go into character creation with a class in mind. You know, they have the idea they want to be, you know, a tanky fighter, or, you know, a wizard slinging spells and so on. But I've just always done it a little bit out of order, I suppose. Character's origin. It's going to consist of choosing 3 things for the character: a race, a background, and a language. Curious to see what that refers to later on, with it being singular like that. And the fact that language is singled out over anything else, put in alongside race and background, is curious. Character's race represents ancestry and confers game traits to the character. Character's background is a collection of characteristics. Represent the place and occupation they were most formative for the character. And in this little section, they skip over the third point there, of the language. So, does common come for free? That's an interesting question, because in 5e, with extremely few exceptions, every character was given common no matter what, because the characters' starting languages were largely tied to their race, which is a decision I don't agree with. It always feels weird that, every character is just inherently given these languages. But I also don't generally like the idea of racial languages in tabletop anyway. I prefer regional, like society-based languages instead. But that is a more complex thing to do, and it's not something that they can as easily drop into a setting agnostic thing. So the racial languages, especially with the way that the typical official D&D settings are made, they're very designed settings in regards to the mythology. Like, orcs are created by this god and elves are created by that god, and so they inherently know these things and do these things and so on. But yeah, it's interesting that they point out those three things: race, background, and language, and then in the kind of explanation of that, they completely ignore one of those 3 points. Yeah, character origin overview. You got a creature type. Every character and monster in the game has a creature type. They've got that asterisk, so we'll take a look at that in a second. It'll be interesting to see if the playable character races come with other creature types than just humanoid, because with 5e they made a pretty strict stance right out the gate that player characters were only humanoids. And then in a playtest for some newer races, they added the ability to be humanoid in addition to another thing. But then when they published some of these races, they got rid of those. So they went back to just strictly being humanoids. So I'm interested to see that. Size, character's size determines space character occupies. Straightforward. And that is something that they've played with a little bit more recently. Another thing that they had a pretty strict stance on early on, you would have your player characters are medium-sized, with the exception of some small races. But now they've opened it up to where a lot of times you can just kind of pick your size between medium or small, depending on certain races and so on. I think it's something that they've done more with the much newer races, like much more recent releases, and they haven't really had anything since then in regards to that stuff. So I think this is going to be kind of expanding on that concept that they've already been playing with a little bit and giving you more flexibility in your character size. And speed. How fast your character moves. Incredibly straightforward. Lifespan is interesting because they stopped putting detailed lifespans on a lot of the character races. And a lot of people didn't like that. People like having some sort of vague guideline at the very least, as opposed to the books just saying, make your character however old you want, and have no concept of racial-based lifespans that previously they all had. So it is cool seeing that that's apparently something that's coming back. I do like having those guidelines whenever I make my D&D characters. I like having an understanding of what is the kind of average, or what is the range of the lifespan for any given race in the typical setting of these books, so that I have something to go off of, and we don't have a strange situation where one character has made their elf character 7,583 years old, and then this other elf character is, I don't know, 22, and expecting them to be roughly the same equivalent age for one reason or another. Having some sort of guidelines is nice. Even if, there's the understanding that any given group of players, any given dungeon master, whatever, game master or narrator, whatever you want to call them, can change any aspect of the game like that, but having something to go by is incredibly nice, incredibly handy. 60-year-old alpha who's still a kid versus 35-year-old human. One thing I will say about the typical lifespan, excuse me, the lifespan content in the usual races is that you have a note in the lifespan for the elves where it's like at roughly a century old they're considered adults. And so you have this huge discussion between people who think that means that they are literally physically until 100 or so years old children, and then some who are like, oh no, it's a society thing, they're not viewed as mentally matured adults until they reach this point, whereas they otherwise mature at this rate or whatever the case might be. It's an interesting scenario, and I feel like taking those concepts, either elves that live a super long time but they physically grow at the same rate as humans, as opposed to elves that are just children for 100 years and then just like their physical aging is just drawn out over centuries as opposed to decades. I feel like there's interesting concepts that would be cool to see in different settings, and I think you do see that in various fantasy settings and TTRPG games. But yeah, one thing that they didn't list there is they didn't list languages in the race traits, which I think is fantastic. They've put languages in the background, which I think makes a little bit more sense. Your background is what you were brought up doing. It's the thing that you did most prominently in your life prior to becoming an adventurer, possibly something you still do, but the point being that it is where you come from, in a sense. So having languages specifically tied to that as opposed to race, I think is incredible. But then, presumably, along with these special traits, whatever various quirks the race might get, because they're all going to have some sort of special benefits and possibly drawbacks, we'll see. They could presumably put some languages in there if they wanted to. For example, in, I think in like Forgotten Realms or one of the other official D&D settings, members of certain races like elves all just inherently know Elvish as a language because it is like bestowed upon them at birth or something. I don't know the fine details. I don't delve too deeply into official settings for TTRPGs. I always play in my own or in other people's settings, so I don't know all of the fine details of the lore of those settings, but I do think that the fact that special traits is just, they couldn't have done anything more specific than that, but I think they do have the flexibility to do that if they want to with the languages. But yeah, right. Ability score bonus is also thrown in the background as well. That's something I think is great. I feel like, some people do argue that the ability score bonus being a racial trait makes sense. On average, an orc is, probably going to be burlier and so on. But I feel like it really does depend on how you're brought up, how you spend your life. If an orc, even if they are, physically inclined to be one way, if that orc just sits around doing nothing all day, they're going to be scrawny as hell. So unless they have some sort of magic or magic-like influence that is keeping them super buff, they shouldn't be forced to be that way. So I think having that in background is incredible. I think that's fantastic. And right here, they lay it out super clear. It's a +2 and a +1. No mountain dwarves with 2+2s. No, nobody getting a +2 and 2+1s. Nobody's getting a +1 across the board. Every character right out the gate, their ability scores are going to be focused in this particular way, which I can take it or leave it. I'm fine with there being some flexibility in the ability score bonuses, but I think for keeping things kind of easier to sort out and easier to for players and dungeon masters to create homebrew backgrounds in this case, having that across the board be the same for every background, it probably makes things a lot easier. Wonder if the ability score being tied to backgrounds are going to create more cookie cutter rogues. Always need to have criminal or whatever for the stats. That's an interesting point. I do feel like one thing that gets around that, presumably, and I don't know if it's included anywhere in this document, but with 5e in the player's handbook, they basically say if you want to do something different with your background, here's the guidelines to do it. And that is just typically a generally accepted thing that you can do. And I could see that being a thing here where, if those rogues and so on want to have those specific stats, they can just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a scholar, but I'm going to take +2 dexterity instead of +2 intelligence or whatever the case might be. And I think that would be a perfectly reasonable little note for them to include in the background section of the official books when this gets printed. But if that's not included anywhere in here, then I wouldn't be surprised about that as well. But I think that is genuinely something to be concerned of, because you would kind of see that in 5e character creation until they started trying to make things a bit more flexible. You would have your rogues who they might play as I don't know, an elf or something, so that they can get a bonus to dexterity or something, and all of that stuff. Maybe a half elf so they can get more skills, whatever the case might be, because rogues are kind of the one of the two kind of skill junkie classes in 5e. But you'd also see it for other races as well, for the ASIs, other classes, I should say. But it does relate to race because that's where the ASIs are from. You would have your barbarians taking, they would be half-orcs or, mountain dwarves or something, because they want to have that strength boost or constitution boost and so on. So I feel like unless they throw in a note that says, this is how these backgrounds usually are, but if you want to switch around the ability scores, go right ahead. Then, with the inclusion of that, I think the worry about cookie cutter characters, in regards to that at least, would be resolved a little bit. Skill proficiencies, you get 2 from a background. Each background gives a tool proficiency with 1 tool. They've asterisked that one, so I'm curious to see what that's about. Creature type also was, so I wonder where they refer to those, because it doesn't seem to be anywhere on these pages, but we'll see. Character learns 1 language from a background. 1 language, that's interesting. I wonder if they felt like 5e characters had too many languages on average, because it was very easy to make a character that would have like 5 or more languages right at level 1 if you wanted to. So I wonder if restricting it to 1 language per background is to counter that. It was interesting. Each background provides a first level feat, a special ability acquired in the character's past. So I would assume, using some understanding for how backgrounds are in typical 5e, each background gave you a feature that was a specific little thing that you could do, or some benefit that you would get for having this background. I wonder if that's what that's referring to, or if this is talking about feats like feats that you could take anytime you get an ability score increase if you're using that feat rule in D&D 5e. We'll have to see that a little bit later. If it is just like a normal feat. That's interesting that they've just decided to go with a very common homebrew rule, which is every character gets a feat at level 1. We'll have to see what the case is for that, because they've certainly piqued my interest in bringing that up here. And then equipment. Character background provides a portion of the character's starting equipment, with the rest coming from class. All right, so pretty similar to how the how 5e characters already worked. Though there are some things that are different here, like the fact that it says one language, the fact that you get your ability scores here, and that each background gets a tool proficiency. You would have a tool proficiency with a lot of backgrounds in stock 5e, but not all of them. So I wonder if One D&D is going to have a focus on more in-depth rules regarding tool proficiencies. I would like that if they did. That would be incredible, because I feel like that's something that is overlooked far too often in D&D 5e. Race and background together help bring character backstory into focus. After choosing race and background, you choose a language that your character knows, in addition to the common tongue or whatever language you gain from your background you chose. Okay, so you get your background language. It's a language specific to that background, maybe. Or maybe they have some options to pick based on their background. We'll have to see. I don't know. You get common for free, regardless of who you are. And then you get to just pick a free language. So you are given common always. So that maintains that idea that the party should always have the ability to communicate one way or another. And that's kind of solved by giving every character the common language. Because without that, you would have a party that has someone who speaks Elvish and Dwarvish, and then someone else who speaks Gnomish and Orcish, and someone who speaks Halfling, and then someone else who speaks Celestial and Infernal, and none of them can communicate with each other. But by giving everyone common, they have that, and you don't have to struggle as a group to figure out how to communicate. All right. Combination of race, background, and language provides fertile soil for your imagination as you ponder your character's early days to imagine the character's family, occupation, hometown, and more. It's interesting, again, that they point out the language as if it's like a big choice for the character, and for backstory reasons, it can be. But people don't typically look at languages in that way. So it's interesting to see them kind of focusing on that. Character races. When you choose your character's race, you determine whether your character is a member of the human race or of a fantastical race. Rules for the following race options: human, Ardling, Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Halfling, Orc, and Tiefling. The only one here that is, at the very least, using a name that hasn't, to my knowledge, been in any of the official 5e published things is Ardling. The rest are like standard player's handbook races, possibly even just basic rules races. Orc. A full orc wasn't in the player's handbook or the basic rules. Instead, they had the half orc. There's also not half elf here. So that's an interesting point. We'll have to look into that, because if they have some other means of combining races to make characters that have heritage from two different races, would be very interesting. Children of different humanoid kinds. Thanks to magical workings of the multiverse, humanoids of different kinds sometimes have children together. Okay, folk might have a human parent and an orc, or an elf parent are particularly common. Many other combinations are possible. If you'd like to play the race of such a wondrous pairing, choose 2 race options that are humanoid to represent your parents. It's interesting that they point out choose 2 race options that are humanoid to represent your parents. That suggests that there's at least flexibility for them to later create race options that are not humanoid. So I would love to see what they would do with that flexibility. Then determine which of these race options provides your game traits size, speed, and special traits. You can then mix and match visual characteristics. Okay, so you pick the two, and effectively, game mechanics wise, you get one of them. But then, for your character backstory and such, you can mix and match however you see fit. So that's a pretty simple way of going about it. Pretty straightforward, and I think one of the easier ways that they could do it. I've seen third-party content that and homebrew and stuff that provided ways of mixing and matching races to do half-breed characters and stuff, and a lot of time it ends up feeling like it's just extra complexity that you don't really need. All right, sorry about that. I had to step away to deal with something real quick. Finally, determine the average of the two options' lifespan traits to figure out how long your character might live. Okay, so I just want to read that last little bit before I moved on. So you average out your lifespan from your parent heritages. All right, so the first race is human. And we've got kind of a little brief description of what humans are all about and so on. And then we get to the actual mechanical content here. And yeah, they're throwing the creature type on the race. That's I'm a little bit excited to see what they could do with that. With other races that could come with One D&D. Size, yeah, right here you can choose medium or small, and it gives you a rough range in height in feet for each of those options. And you've got your lifespan. It's not a full like a full detailed breakdown of like they're considered adult at this age and they're considered elderly at this age and their life, full lifespan is to this age. It's just roughly how long they live. Pretty basic though. Older editions did go into more of the kind of breakdown of different age ranges. So I was unsure if they were going to go that route or not. And then the special traits. It's wild seeing the character broken down into such a short little block here, because your character race would in stock 5e be a more substantial bit of text. This is incredibly brief. Gain proficiency in a skill of your choice with a skillful feature or trait. You gain inspiration whenever you finish a long rest with a resourceful trait, and gain the skilled feat or another first level feat of your choice with the versatile trait. Interesting. Let's see here. Humans of many worlds. Okay, so they also kind of give a breakdown on different kind of multiverse culture differences and things like that in regards to humans. 2 feats. Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing, because that's something that would come up when people were doing the free first level feat house rule. You would have people who would play as the variant human race, which would get a feat at first level, and then with the rule to get a first level feat at level 1. That was redundant. A free feat at level 1. In addition, they would get 2 feats at level 1. So it seems like humans here kind of get that same thing, it seems like, assuming that's what the background is talking about. What the background is talking about. I'm terrible with words. Anyway, so we move on from there to Ardling, which I actually want to do a little bit more reading on this one. But before I do have to briefly step away, so I will be right back. All right, and I am back. Let's see here. So where was I? Ardling. This is a name that I haven't seen anywhere else. I'm not sure what this is. I'm assuming it's roughly something new. I saw, like, here they mention angelic flight, and there's like some mention of celestial stuff. So it seems like this is a new take on, or at least a new name for ASMR, which I'm not sure why they would need to do that, but it could also just be that they wanted something a little bit different, and then they plan to still do ASMR as they were. I'm not sure. Supernal beings who are either born on the upper planes or have one or more ancestors who originated there. An Ardling has a head resembling that of an animal. I remember someone mentioning that in discussion previously. So they're kind of like... I think one of the examples someone mentioned was that they're like Egyptian gods and so on that would have like be depicted with like a humanoid body but then have the head of an animal. Typically one with virtuous associations. Depending on the animal, the Ardling might also have soft fur, downy feathers, or supple bare skin. The Ardling's celestial legacy determines the animal it resembles. So you pick exalted, heavenly, or idyllic. Let's see. Let's see here. They like the alignment variety. I mean, let's see. Okay, let's see here. Fierce passions of Arborea, the heroic heart of Isgard, and the wondrous nature of the Beastlands call to Ardlings who have the exalted celestial legacy. Their celestial ancestors are heroic champions of the chaotic good planes. Heavenly is lawful good, and idyllic is neutral good. So Ardlings are specifically, in regards to alignment, they are specifically good beings, or based on celestials from those alignments, at least. I am personally not a fan of the use of alignment. I feel like it ends up leading to a lot more confusion than it's worth. A lot of people have different ideas of what alignment means, and even if people are generally on the same wavelength when it comes to alignment, you do still have discrepancies between what one person would consider lawful good and what another would consider lawful good. And you have stuff like people looking at alignment as if it's something that is relative to the person perceiving it. So like it what is good or evil depends on the person who is considering the act in question. And if that's the case, then I mean, in the context of the way D&D settings and planes and stuff works, that is clearly not the case, because there are inherently like universally dictated definitions to what the alignments are. But even then, you know, trying to determine if any given act is one thing or another through a range of 9 different options gets complicated, and they obviously can't write down every possible example of what is, you know, lawful good and what is chaotic good and so on. So it's I think it has some merit to it. I think there are benefits to it, but in general, I think it causes more confusion than it solves. So not a fan of the use of it, and that's why in my settings I don't tie alignment to anything. I don't even discuss alignment in my settings. So but moving on here, the Ardlings are humanoid. So I would imagine going through all of the races in this document, they're all going to be humanoid. Still could be taken by surprise, but I would bet that the basic races are all going to be considered humanoid. These guys as well are medium or small that you choose. 30-foot movement speed and a much longer lifespan than humans. And then they get their special traits. They have a bonus action flight speed that they can activate, equal to their normal movement speed. And Let's see. Okay, so yeah, it's you use a bonus action and you can fly up to your movement speed, and then it ends. And then you get to use that a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. That right there is a change that I've heard people talking about that is probably incredibly good at making these racial traits in a way scale as you continue to level up. They might be just as powerful from day one as they are at, the end of your adventures, but you get to use it more frequently. It kind of feels like you are becoming more adept with these inherent skill sets or abilities that you might have. So, at level 1, you can use this 2 times, but at level 20, you can use it 6 times or whatever the case might be. It seems like that's something that they're doing pretty consistently with these features, is tying it to the proficiency bonus. And you regain uses at a long rest. Oh, and your legacy, I guess tied into the special traits, gives you some spells, similar to what a lot of the D&D 5e races get, where you have this kind of innate magic based on your, in this case, your Celestial Legacy. So you get, at certain levels, you unlock different spells. And it looks like the first one is always a cantrip. The second one's probably first level spell, and then the third one is, what was that, a second level spell? Which I'm sure it says right here. Actually doesn't say. Just kind of relegates it to what the specific spells are. But that's entirely in line with how that trait worked on existing 5e races. So that's interesting to see. And then damage resistance. So they're not shying away from adding resistances to races. I know I've seen people have issues with races that have certain resistances. I've seen people have much greater issues with races that have immunities, but that's something that they have stopped doing. When they republished a lot of older content, they removed races that had immunities to instead just have resistance. An example that comes to mind is the UNT Pureblood. Instead of having a poison immunity, they changed it to a resistance in the republish of it. So, it does feel cool. I feel like as a player to, completely 100% tank a hit because your inherent physiology is immune to that thing. But, I feel like it is one of the more potent kind of traits you could get, so I can understand them taking that away. Dragonborn. Let's see. All the classic dragons of like metallic and chromatic. Unfortunately, it looks like they're not doing any of the gem dragons or anything in this version, but if we're lucky, maybe in a later playtest or something, that they would expand upon the draconic ancestors, because I think that was one of the more popular things that came out for dragons for Dragonborn was the gem dragon ancestors. Again, humanoid. Dragonborn cannot be small. That's interesting. They are strictly medium. And about a human lifespan there. They get their breath weapon and resistance based on their ancestry. So you would pick a type of dragon, and you would get a damage type related to that. That would be applied to your breath weapon and your damage resistance. And they have dark vision. That's something I'm going to be watching out for. I'm going to be watching out for how many of these races have dark vision. So right now we're 3 in, and only one of them has dark vision. That is, I think, it's looking good so far. One issue that I have with 5e is that so many of the races have dark vision that it almost feels like a weakness to play a race that doesn't have dark vision. A lot of time when I'm making characters, just because as a dungeon master, I know how it feels when you have the ability to use darkness as a tool in creating encounters and dungeons and so on like that. But because of that perspective, I often make characters that don't have dark vision so that I can have that weakness to my character. And it's a cool thing to try to work around as well. And here's one of those things I was talking about: draconic language. So Dragonborn instinctively know the language of dragons. They, regardless of where they were raised or what they did in their life, they will always know Draconic. Dwarves. Always a favorite of mine. I love dwarves. They're so cool. Right off the bat, humanoid, only medium. It's interesting that dwarves, one of the shorter races by default, can only be medium. They can't be small. I guess people don't want to think about a dwarf that's even smaller than the dwarf already is. But yeah, that is interesting because a human can be smaller than a dwarf. I always figured it balances out for dwarves because they're kind of right on the cusp of 4 to 5 feet. That's kind of almost medium as it is anyway, or I guess right at kind of where medium starts, considering they are medium. But also the stockiness I always attributed to being part of why they are considered medium and not small, despite their shorter height. Dwarven resilience. They have resistance to poison damage. It sounds like an advantage on saving throws against poison condition. So far, sounding pretty in line with what they already had. 60-foot dark vision. So with that dark vision, we're 2 out of 4. My ideal situation would be that less than half of the races have dark vision, but we'll see how it goes. I'm for all I know, I could be the only person who feels that way. Dwarven toughness, you're a little boost to your hit point maximum. Forge wise, here's one of those things I was talking about in kind of the way that the Forgotten Realms and other official D&D settings work, is a lot of the races are bestowed things from their deities, and right here, right out the gate, your divine creator gave you the ability to be good with one of these tools. I think previously it was Mason's tools, Smith's tools, and Brewer's tools. In this case, they've traded out Brewer's for Jeweler's and Tinker's tools, which I think makes sense. Kind of thinking about the dwarf character fantasy, working with stone with the Mason's tools makes a lot of sense. They're underground, they're in mountains, they're going to know how to work stone. It's just going to be kind of innate to the terrain they're natively from. Smith's tools goes right into that kind of dwarven character fantasy that is throughout all manner of fantasy media. The best smiths in all of the lands so often are dwarves. Sometimes they're elves, I guess, but you get a lot of dwarven blacksmiths. To a point that's an archetype that I've kind of used pretty frequently in my own settings. Jeweler's tools makes a lot of sense to me, the same reason as Mason's tools. If they're working the stone, you're going to come across gemstones, and so it makes sense that they're going to know how to work those as well. And then Tinker's tools is an interesting one because it makes me think of like Warcraft type lore, where gnomes and dwarves who kind of came up in the same area and in the lore were very closely tied together had a lot of machinery stuff related to them. And in that case, it was much more so present in the gnomes than the dwarves, but it was a bit of a shared interest, it seemed like. But I do think it's interesting because they've moved away from, at least in this feature, they've moved away from the archetype of dwarven brewers and dwarves, just inherently being heavy drinkers and so on. And I'm sure that trope will be present in pretty much, the vast majority of people's D&D games still, but it's not present in the race itself anymore. Stone cutting. This sounds cool just at a brief glance. As a bonus action, they gain Tremor Sense out to 60 feet for 10 minutes. So previously, stone cutting just gave dwarves the ability to almost innately know about stonework, so they could look at stonework and be like, oh yeah, it was from this this society this many centuries ago, and it's made of this material, and so on and so forth. It was something that was relegated much more to roleplay, and it was a very particular quirk as well. And so unfortunately it was one of those things that was just kind of left by the wayside in a lot of people's games. Didn't ever really get used a lot because it was such a niche thing. But here they've completely changed it up to make it a 10-minute Tremor Sense, which inherently has so much more use, is so much more practical of a feature, that it doesn't feel like dwarves are just being given this kind of nothing ribbon. It's like a potent ability that they have now. It's a bonus action to use it, same as the Ardling Angelic Flight. And they get a number of uses based on proficiency bonus, and it comes back at a long rest. One thing I didn't look too deeply on the breath weapon here, actually, for the Dragonborn. It's on a long rest, and it's based on proficiency bonus. So I would bet that basically word for word, this paragraph will be on all of these features. I'm guessing it's always going to be a long rest, and it's always going to be proficiency bonus for these multi-use features. The fine details of the DC is pretty normal. 8 plus con mod plus proficiency bonus. I do wish that there was more flexibility in the ability score that was used on features like this, because I feel like having it tied to a specific single thing limits who it's useful to, right? Barbarians and fighters, characters that are made to be tanky frontliners, are most likely going to have high constitution, whereas a wizard is probably not going to have the highest of constitution, right? Rogue might not have a very high constitution, and so on. And those characters are inherently going to be slightly worse at using this ability than those frontline focused characters. Granted, being that it is a 15-foot cone, that's also kind of a short-range feature, so being more useful on those frontliners probably does make a bit of sense. But that's just the saving throw DC. The damage is based on your character level, which is a good way to scale it, I think. It's weird that I guess if they based it on proficiency, like if it was a D10 plus proficiency bonus, it would scale so slowly and feel so middling at higher levels, right? As it's written here, you get a D10 plus 20 at level 20, whereas it'd be a D10 plus 6 at level 20 if it was proficiency bonus. So I think that makes sense. And that's a good way to scale it to where every level it feels like it keeps on going. Let's see, who's next? Elves. Elves are good. And they have something about lineages here, so you can pick your sub race, or for lack of a better term. I guess lineage is the term that they've chosen to go by, but it looks like that's Yeah, we'll get to that in a second here. 3 out of 5 with dark vision now. It's skewing in the way that I would prefer it not to. But we've still got more races to go. We're what, 4, 5 in at this point? Elven lineage grants you supernatural abilities. Oh, here's another thing. I didn't mention the initial traits. They're humanoid, medium, 30 feet movement speed, and a 750-year lifespan. Were dwarves slower at all? I want to see where were dwarves. There. Okay, so everyone is 30 feet so far. I think the only ones that were less than 30 feet were the small races in Stock 5e, but dwarves might have also been included in that. I don't remember. I would have to check, but I do think having a floor of 30 feet probably makes sense, and is probably the best way to keep it simple, but we'll see as we move on. Elven lineages, drow, the Underdark, High Elf of Fey Crossings and other magic locations, and Wood Elves of Primeval Forests. They get some spells. They get a first level benefit. Again, based on long rests. Oh, but they can also cast these spells if they have spell slots. That's incredible. I don't think that was ever worded that way in similar features. I bet if I went to look at the Ardling, it would say the same thing. But in Stock 5e, you would know these spells inherently, but you would get like 1 use per long rest or whatever the case is, and then that was it. But having the ability to cast these with spell slots as well is incredible. And on top of that, they're not relegated to a single ability score. They have an option of any of the mental ability scores, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, to choose when they pick their lineage. That's great. I love that. So this whole, the way this is worded, I think is fantastic. I think they've done really well with this kind of this innate magic type traits that they've been doing. I think that's fantastic. Fey Ancestry, advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the charmed conditioner on yourself. I think previously it was worded differently from that, in such a way that subsequent rolls to end those conditions would just be normal rolls. Whereas this, it specifically points out that it is avoiding it at the beginning or ending it on subsequent saving throws. So that's good. That's good wording, and I think that makes sense for the idea of the feature, for it to continue to be useful even if the effect has already taken root. Keen Senses, giving you proficiency in perception. That's 1-to-1 what it was previously. And Trance, you don't need to sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. You can finish a long rest in 4 hours if you spend these hours in trance-like meditation, during which you retain consciousness. So I think something that they're doing really well here is being more particular in their wording. D&D 5e already has like almost like a dialect to it that you start to pick up as you get more accustomed to playing with the system. But here, they are wording things in more specific ways to where there is less ambiguity, I think. And avoiding ambiguity is a boon, I feel like. I think a lot of the original concept for D&D 5e was they were ambiguous on a lot of things because they wanted to provide loose guidelines and let the players and the dungeon masters dictate what those things mean. But then that leads to a lot of arguments and people from Wizards of the Coast and so on being tweeted about these different things. And it's always good to get feedback and clarity from the people who created this stuff, I think. But if the book can provide that clarity, all the better. Looking at the lineages here, Drow's first level features, they get their dark vision increased to 120 feet, and they know dancing lights. And then third level Fairy Fire and Darkness. I think that's pretty much in line with what they had in stock 5e. High Elves get Prestidigitation, and they can change that cantrip with a different cantrip from the Arcane spell list. This reference to the Arcane spell list is something that I saw when I previously looked at this. With older editions, you would have spells grouped into different archetypes of spells. So you'd have Arcane and Occult and Primal and Divine and so on. You also see that in other similar tabletop RPGs, but with 5e they kind of went away from that and just did class spell lists. But having the option here to say High Elves aren't inherently just wizards, right? So they don't pull from the wizard spell list, they pull from the Arcane spell list because they are Arcane influenced creatures. And having those kind of vague spell lists related to the type of magic as opposed to the class that uses the magic, I think is great as well. And then they get Detect Magic and Misty Step. I think those spells might be different from what they already had in stock 5e. What am I doing? I am kind of curious about this, though. So let's go ahead and let me check. I do want to check on these spells. So yeah, Dancing Lights, Fairy Fire, and Darkness for the Drow, which is the same as in One D&D. Okay, so something that I completely forgotten is that High Elves didn't have that innate magic feature. They just had a cantrip, and they had to use intelligence. Honestly, I feel like elves are designed much better. I feel like the One D&D interpretation of the elf race is so much better than the official one. They are a bit more homogenous because you just have these slight differences with the lineages, but I think that what they've done with them is a lot more interesting. I'm also seeing that they didn't do like weapon or armor proficiencies on any of the races so far, which I think is great in one sense and kind of unfortunate in another. I think it's good because those are often features that would get ignored because, like, say you played as a dwarf and you had dwarven weapon proficiencies, and because of that, like, you were good at using hammers and axes or whatever the case is specifically. If you were already going to use those weapons, you're probably playing in a class that got those proficiencies already. If not, you're probably playing in a class that isn't able to make great use of those weapon proficiencies. So, like, a wizard being able to use battle axes, you could make a really fun character concept with that combination, but to get the most out of your character class, you're going to want to focus in certain ways that is going to make it harder to make use of those proficiencies. So it's because it was something that was so often ignored, I think that it makes sense to not waste the time adding those features, but it is unfortunate that you miss out on the opportunities through those features to get strange combinations you might not otherwise see with, like, a wizard who uses a warhammer because they're a dwarf. Yeah, the Wood Elf here increases speed to 35 feet, and they know Druidcraft, Long Strider, and Pass Without Trace. Again, Wood Elf I don't think had any spells. They just had the speed increase and some other quirks to them. But it looks good to me. I feel like it's a good mix here. Like, Wood Elves feel like they would be using more primal magic. So they've got Druidcraft, Longstrider, and Pass Without Trace that are typically Ranger and Druid spells. Whereas the High Elf has Detect Magic and Misty Step, which you would often see on sorcerers and wizards and so on. So it has that very clear like identity difference there that I think is really good. And they've got more kind of description on these races in other worlds, which I think is great because having more than one setting's interpretation to go off of presented in the book, I think is really good. Like obviously they have they would design these things for the Forgotten Realms, right? Assuming One D&D doesn't change what the standard setting is. I don't see why they would at this point. Forgotten Realms has worked out really well for D&D 5e, I think. But then being able to see how things are in Eberron and Dragonlance and all that stuff, I think is really, really nice to have. At the very least, like what they have here, a brief summary that kind of explains some things about those. Moving on to gnomes, exclusively a small race, 30 feet movement speed. So I do think that they are sticking to that 30-foot movement speed floor. And then you have things like the Wood Elf that gets a boost to 35 feet. Still humanoid, super long lifespan because they're gnomes. That's another point for dark vision. So I don't think we're going to get out of the everybody has dark vision trap that stock 5e already has at this rate. Gnomish cunning, advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. I think that's the same that gnomes already had. At least a certain type of gnome, I think, had that. And then they get a lineage as well. They can be forest gnomes or rock gnomes. Interestingly, they don't include deep gnomes, which is a shame. Kind of the Duragar equivalent to gnomes in some ways. Or probably a more familiar relation would be the drow equivalent for gnomes, which is kind of what Duragar are to dwarves. And I'm just going to call them deep gnomes because their lore name is a bunch of letters and I don't remember how to say it. But let's look at this. Forest gnomes get the minor illusion cantrip. Can also cast Speak with Animals a number of times based on the proficiency bonus. And can use spell slots to cast it. Meanwhile, rock gnomes get Mending and Prestidigitation. They get 2 cantrips. That's kind of a first so far. But they don't get anything else. They don't get like a spell that can only be used a certain number of times. They just get these 2 cantrips. Oh, hold on. There is more to them. If they spend 10 minutes casting Prestidigitation, they can create a tiny clockwork device. Okay, something that slipped my mind. Rock gnomes had a feature where they could create these little clockwork gadgets or toys, and they have maintained that as a casting of Prestidigitation, kind of treating it as a ritual cast of the cantrip. Consumes 10 gold worth of materials during casting, and then they create this device. Determine its function by choosing one effect from the spell. And then it produces that effect whenever you or another creature use a bonus action to activate it, to touch the device and activate it. That's more of that particular wording that is good to have. If the chosen effect has options within it, you choose one of those options for the device when you create it. So when you make this thing, you lock in its very specific function to it. For example, if you choose the spell's Ignite Extinguish effect, you determine whether the device ignites or extinguishes fire. The device doesn't do both. So you could make a lighter or you could make a fire extinguisher. And a number of other features based on the Prestidigitation spell, but I like that example. You can make 3 of these at a time. Each one dismantles itself after 8 hours. You also touch one of your devices and dismantle as an action, and you get the materials back when it's dismantled. So that is pretty much in line with their little gadget making feature for stock 5e. It's a bit different because it's based specifically on prestidigitation effects, but let's go ahead and I want to pull up Gnomes real quick and look at how theirs was worded. I believe they had a small selection of specific effects. Yep. So you would pick which of these three things you would want to do: the Firestarter, Music Box, or Clockwork Toy. And the Firestarter could be used to light things. Music Box would play a song, and the Clockwork Toy would move across the floor and make noise. So I think you can pretty much recreate those features to some degree with the new take on it, though you can only have it do one thing. So like with the example of the Clockwork Toy, it moved and also made noise. I don't think you would be able to do that with the new version. I don't even know if you could make something that moves with the new version. But you could do something that makes noise. You could do something that lights fires. You can also do something that extinguishes fires. All right. In general, I think this is a more flexible design for it. I think it more flexible because you have all of the options of prestidigitation. And from that, what the features of the device are. But you can't completely recreate the ones that they already had in the older version. So it's I think it's, you know, in general, I think I prefer the new version. Moving on from gnomes is halflings, another small-sized race. Humanoid, 30 feet movement speed, and a much shorter lifespan compared to the gnomes, but still longer than humans, almost twice as much as humans. Much more brief bit of information here, because it's just the basic halflings. They get brave, giving them advantage to avoid or end frightened condition. Again, I really like that wording, that specific wording that they give to avoid or end the condition, because the previous race design didn't take that into account, I don't believe. Halfling nimbleness can move through the space of any creature that is of a size larger than yours, but you can't stop there. That's in line with what they already had. Same, hold on, was brave a thing as well? We went to gnomes. We're going to halflings now. Let's see here. Okay, so yeah, and here you can see an example of the previous wording for this kind of feature. You have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. You could interpret that as being the initial saving throw and ongoing saving throws, but I've seen a lot of people interpret it as just the initial saving throw. So that's, I mean, on all accounts, pretty much the same as the new version. Halfling nimbleness was also pretty much the same. Luck, when you roll a 1 on the d20 of a d20 test, this is some more like terminology that they've been using in this document that is kind of new. You can re-roll the die and you must use the new roll, which is, again, pretty much in line with how it was worded previously. So halflings are pretty much the same, except they also get stealth proficiency. Yeah, so they... Gnomes previously... Oh, you know what? Lightfoot halflings had a stealth-based thing, but it wasn't a proficiency. It was the ability to hide even when they're obscured only by a creature that is at least a size larger. So kind of a niche feature there because you have to hide behind another creature. Whereas this, you're just better at being sneaky. The name is spot on. Naturally stealth. Dark Tower, how's it going? Halfling Luck seems to be OP with a new D20 test where any 1 is a fail and any 20 is a success. You know, I can see that actually. And we'll get into the D20 test stuff when we get to the end of this document. But that's a good point. If they can re-roll a 1, they can avoid an automatic failure. Because unlike SOC 5e, where a natural 1 on a non-attack roll would just mean you get whatever your bonus is plus 1. With the D20 test that they've mentioned in this document, any natural 1, whether it's an attack or otherwise, is always going to fail whatever you're trying to do. So, yeah. I don't know that I would consider it OP, but it's definitely a potent feature, and I think it always was. But you know, anything that lets you re-roll is pretty good. But yeah, with the fact that you can have a good chance of avoiding those automatic failures is pretty solid. Hot take of the night: Wizards of the Coast has a bit of an issue in their default setting is supposed to be a very human-centric setting, but 5th edition especially has kind of encouraged parties that are a wonky mixture of furries and aliens. The kind of group that should be inspiring and lynching whenever they happen to roam in Faerun. Yeah, that's something that I've come across in my own settings that are very human-centric as well. A lot of times people just don't want to be humans for one reason or another, and that's fine. And I mean, the solution to that, right, is not having much or anything at all in the way of non-human races. But at that point, there's a lot of content, there's a lot of options that you're missing out on by removing those, which you can work around if your setting lets your race, if everyone is human, if you have a lot of flexibility in what that means. Effectively, like if you could pick, any of these races, but you're still considered human, then, that would feel fine mechanically speaking. But the way D&D and D&D style TTRPGs are designed, to change up the race is to change up the race options is a difficult thing, because people always want those options, that flexibility, and just removing the options just feels bad. But again, there are solutions. I've seen it done in third-party things and elsewhere in other systems and stuff like that. So there are ways around it, but yeah. Let's see here. Where were we? Just got done with the halflings here, so I guess hold on. No dark vision. It's one for the races without dark vision, but we still have the majority dark vision, which is a bit of a bummer to me. Orcs also have dark vision. Hold on, let's just look. Let's look at tieflings. Dark vision. Okay, so yep, that's what, 7 or 8 out of like 10 to 12. The majority of the races have dark vision. That's unfortunate in my mind. In older editions, when you would have like low light vision, and then also some things would have dark vision, and just generally having more senses, I think, was more interesting, especially because you could still use darkness as a tool in dungeon designs and counter design. But it's not the end of the world, even if everyone can see not perfectly in the dark, but even if everyone can see reasonably well in the dark. But let's move on here. I think only humans, halflings, and maybe ardlings. Yeah, ardlings didn't have it, I'm pretty sure. Halflings don't, and humans don't. I think those are the only ones. Humans or orcs are humanoid. They are medium, about 6 to 7 feet tall, so a bit taller on average than humans by like a couple feet. Or a foot, maybe. Switched over to being a superhero game with fantasy trappings under Wizards of the Coast. I mean, I can see that comparison. I that kind of makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when playing 5e, a lot of time it feels like the goal is to feel strong, and you know, as a player, it feels good to feel powerful, right? But kind of the other edge of that is that if there is no challenge, then what are you really doing, right? So, and that's something that comes down to each individual game, right? I know I've run games that are just like complete power fantasy from start to finish, where like the players are just like demolishing everything in their path, and they come across challenges, but the entire point of the campaign was to feel powerful and to become godlike, in at least one specific example. And then I've done others that are a lot more challenging, a lot intended to be a lot tougher on average, and have more ongoing struggle, which you know, it's all possible throughout D&D 5e, but it does take work on behalf of the person doing the encounter design and dungeon design and all everything in between, you know, whoever your dungeon master, game master is, as well as to some degree it is kind of on the players as well to have in mind the kind of game that they've come to the table to play. So when everyone has kind of figured all that out together and everyone is on the same page, you can do a lot of things with 5e. It's a very flexible system. All right. So orcs are effectively, just on their base traits here, a little bit taller than humans. And that's it. Same lifespan, same speed, same creature type. Moving on to the traits, they have Adrenaline Rush. I think that's the same name as one that they had in stock 5e. But actually, I'm thinking half orcs again, not full orcs. But I could even be getting that wrong. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, I'm thinking about half orcs. I am definitely getting that wrong. It doesn't look like. It looks like they have the Relentless Endurance from half orcs. They have the Dark Vision and the Dark Vision of half orcs. Powerful Build is a new one to that, but that could also have been on the stock orcs. So I'm gonna take a look at those as well. Let's see. Where are they? Where are they hiding? Here they are. Oh, the Monsters in the Multiverse version did have Relentless Endurance. And they have Adrenaline Rush, Dark Vision, and Powerful Build. So, yeah, this one almost certainly based on the Monsters in the Multiverse version of Orcs, because that is the most recent publishing of character race content, I believe. Bonus action dash. I think more options to give a wide variety of different classes bonus actions is for the best. A lot of time it feels like the rogues get bonus actions, spellcasters sometimes have bonus actions, but the vast majority of characters don't get a lot of options with bonus actions. So giving more bonus action traits and features is fantastic. Again, tied to the proficiency bonus and long rests. Dark vision to 60 feet, same as everyone else except for the dark elves. Powerful build is exactly the same as it always was. And relentless endurance, reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright. You can drop to 1 hit point instead once per long rest. I believe that is pretty much the same, if not word for word. Yeah, that's pretty much the same. So, Monsters in the Multiverse Orc is pretty much like the basis of what they're going for. The thing that Monsters of the Multiverse didn't have was these little details. The heights and the lifespan, stuff like that, they kind of threw out with more recent 5e publishings, but it's good to see One D&D bringing those back, in my opinion. Yeah, tying more things to proficiency bonus is a great move overall. I agree. I think it's good to have more scaling. When the bulk of racial features were once per long rest, and that's it. Nothing different. It's like you've got this little one-off that a lot of the times you just you might not even use it because like you only get one once per day. So you gotta be stingy with it, right? But now with proficiency bonus stuff, you start at 2 uses, you end at 6 uses. You do still have some things like the relentless endurance here that is just once per long rest, but that's because that's a very potent feature. If you could get knocked to 0 and then still be standing at 1 hit point 6 times in a fight, in a day rather, that would feel like too much. Moving on to Tieflings, I believe the last race here. And they have 3 legacies. The 2 that come to mind are Abyssal and Infernal. Chthonic. Okay. All right. So Tieflings are an interesting one because they're maybe the race in Stock 5e that has with all of the books that they've published, probably the most sub-races, because they have like one for like every level of hell, and then they've got feral tieflings, and those have some variety within, and then it's just there was a lot of variety with that, and maybe down the line they would continue to kind of republish some of those things for One D&D, but keeping it relatively simple here with just 3 options is it's probably a good call. Similar to humans in heights and in sizes, they're another one of the ones where you can pick medium or small. 30-foot speed, 100-year lifespan on average, so a bit more than a human, but not crazy long lifespan. Dark vision is 60 feet. Again, the standard for One D&D, unfortunately. The races without dark vision are still the outliers, which is unfortunate. Your legacy grants you supernatural abilities. Abyssal associated with chaotic evil. Okay, so they do 3 because the Ardlings also got 3. So it's just kind of the evil side of the coin, where they've got chaotic evil, neutral evil, and lawful evil. Makes sense. First level benefits, and it looks like they get spells as well. Hold on now. What do they use for casting these spells? They get the choice. And that's something I skipped over with the Ardlings. I would bet if I looked at them, they would have the choice as well. I think having options like this, I mentioned it before, having options like this in spellcasting ability is incredible. Would like to see it on the Dragonborn Breath Weapon as well, but, it is what it is. It is kind of an unrelated feature to this, so it having a different design isn't super crazy. And then they get Otherworldly Presence, which gives them Thaumaturgy, and uses the same spellcasting ability as their Fiendish Legacy trait. Cool. So they just get a free cantrip just for being tieflings, in addition to whatever legacy they are. So Abyssal gets Poison Resistance, Chthonic is Necrotic Resistance, and Infernal is Fire Resistance. I like seeing the differences there. Previously, all tieflings had Fire Resistance. So seeing some differences there is cool. Poison Spray, Ray of Sickness, and Hold Person on Abyssal. Chill Touch, False Life, Ray of Enfeeblement on Chthonic. Firebolt, Hellish Rebuke, and Darkness on Infernal. Not much to say on those. I mean, I feel like in general, it's good spell options. Don't see False Life used very often, but maybe that's just, my experiences. Maybe other people's tables have seen otherwise. Having dark vision is standard because dungeons are usually dark places. In a game called Dungeons and Dragons, seems on brand, to be honest. Dungeons very often are expected to be dark, and it makes sense to be ready for that. But when everyone can see in the dark, it makes torches and lamps and lanterns of all, 3 or 4 varieties. The light spell, dancing lights. There's a lot of things that feel a lot less useful when everyone can see in the dark inherently. But yeah, that's it for the races. I think overall, the race design is pretty solid in their One D&D playtest material so far. I'd be interested in seeing this take on other races as well that aren't the basic races, but it makes sense for them to have a pretty limited scope so far, or just in general for the playtest. So I wouldn't expect to see anything beyond the races that we have here for a very long time, if at all, before actually publishing. But that brings us to backgrounds, kind of the second of the 3 kind of main points of this book. You got race backgrounds and then all the rules and stuff. When you choose background, you have 3 options. Build a background using the rules in the build your background section. Okay, so that might be the way to do kind of what I was talking about at the very beginning when I was talking about mixing around the ability scores that you're given by your background. You can also select a pre-made background from the sample background section. That's interesting that they call it sample backgrounds. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I would bet the build the background has very solid explanation on what choices you can make and how you make them. Because in the player's handbook for backgrounds for stock 5e, they did a pretty good job at that. So let's see. Third option, select pre-made background from the sample background section, and then customize it with the rules and build your background. Okay, yeah, 100% exactly what I was talking about at the beginning there. No matter which background you choose, consider these questions from a character's viewpoint. How does your background influence your current worldview? How do you embrace or reject your background? Did you form any relationships during your background that endure today? Build your background. So, using the rules here, you can build a background from scratch or customize a pre-made background focusing on details related to the backstory you have in mind for your character. Character gains features in the background features section. As you make choices for these features, think about your character's past. If you instead choose to decide to customize a pre-made background, you can choose any features in that background and replace them with features below of the same name. For example, if you want to change a background's language feature, you can replace that feature with the language feature below. So I did just now, the stuff I read, I was kind of skipping over the the why and what to think about when picking things, because I think that's, you know, not quite as necessary in this context to read out, but that just kind of skims to the important parts here. And again, it sounds like they've laid it out pretty straightforward, pretty clearly. And we'll see that here looking at the features. Ability scores, choose 2 of them, increase 1 by 2 and 1 by 1. Alternatively, choose 3 ability scores, increase each of them by 1. Okay, so you do have some flexibility in your ability scores. If you want a more general range, effectively, you get 3 points, and you can't put them all in the same spot. So the way that they've worded it is the best way to word it. But you have nothing like the mountain dwarves that have 2 plus 2 ability scores, and nothing like the stock 5e human that has every ability score increased by 1. Skill proficiencies. 2 skills, gain proficiency. 2 proficiency, choose 1 tool, gain proficiency. Language. Choose 1 language from the standard and rare languages tables later in this document. Your character knows that language. Gain 1 first level feat. Your character gains that feat. Or choose 1 first level feat. You gain that feat. And equipment. This is something that they didn't talk about in the stock 5e background. Only the pre-made backgrounds had equipment, and they didn't have any explanation on determining the value of equipment you should pick for custom backgrounds. My workaround for that was often just telling people, take the equipment from an existing background and just use that. Benefit in that case being stock 5e has a lot of backgrounds. There are a ton of them, so you have a lot of options for that equipment. But here, you just get 50 GP worth of equipment, and you keep anything unspent, which lays it out very simply and very clearly. You can use that 50 however you want for your background, and it's perfect. It's great. It's fantastic. I love it. I think that they did a really good job at laying out how to make or customize the backgrounds. I'm probably not going to go through every single background in the sample backgrounds. The important part, I think, is the how to customize them. But I want to look at these feats. You can see here, being an acolyte, you get your ability scores, you get your skill proficiencies, tool proficiency, language, all in line with this, as well as a first level feat. In this case, Magic Initiate for the Divine Spell list. Again, looking at those general spell lists, those non-class based spell lists, which I think are great for purposes like feats that give you access to spells. And then this is the equipment you would get. And they didn't write it out like a sentence. They just gave you a list, which I think is better than writing a comma-separated sentence of what your equipment is. And then they also give you kind of a little summary of what the background is as well. So I think that's pretty good. Interestingly here, I'm guessing this is for the criminal, yeah. They list Thieves' Cant in language, and in Stock 5e they made an effort to dictate that Thieves' Cant and a couple of other specific options were not considered languages. For one reason or another, they didn't want them being considered languages. I think so that people couldn't be like a non-druid and get access to the druidic language by having a free language from their background or their race or whatever the case might be. Same with Thieves' Cant, because these quote-unquote languages were intended to be more particular, given by very specific circumstances, either by being a rogue or criminal for Thieves' Cant, or by being a druid for druidic. I feel like there was another one as well that fell in line with those, but it's not coming to me. I could be completely wrong and just making it up But I also want to go through and see if they've added any. I mean, like I said, there's like a million different backgrounds in stock 5e. I don't remember there being a cultist background. I could be wrong about that. Farmer, I don't think was there either. They had a folk hero, which would have a similar background to the farmer, but a little bit different. Here they have gladiator, which is different from entertainer. In stock 5e, gladiator was a variant of entertainer, which led to some weird equipment options and proficiencies and stuff. That's interesting. The fact that languages come with the background, you have things like this, like the farmer getting halfling for, I guess, presumably because halflings would have a pretty strong sense of agriculture, and so maybe it becomes natural for a lot of the terminology with farming to be halfling based. Could be the same with dwarvish for guards. But again, these are all things that you can freely change out for equivalent options, so that's good stuff there. I think they've designed the background stuff really well, and I think their formatting that they're using here is really good as well. Like, obviously, it's like I could see them changing this up to make it a little bit more shiny for an official published version, but honestly, if they kept it as basic as this for the formatting for the backgrounds, I think this would be perfect. I think this would be just fine. Especially considering they consider them sample backgrounds and not the options. The fact that they're not incentivizing, but encouraging people to come up with their own backgrounds, I think is fantastic. And then the third of their kind of main points is starting languages. That's all the background stuff. I think they laid it out pretty well. Again, I was interested in this section right here, how to create them and how to customize them. I think that's the important part, and it seems that their design leaves that as being the important part as well. But yeah, your character begins play knowing at least 3 languages: common, a language provided by the background, and a language that you choose from the standard languages table below. So your background can be standard or rare languages, but your free language can only be standard. So that's an interesting to keep in mind. Obviously, any table can overrule any of this, but since that's the case, it's important to consider what the actual book says. Knowledge of a language means your character can communicate in that language and can read and write it. So, one thing that I've seen done in a third-party thing that I'm a huge fan of, in addition to reading and writing their languages, is they also include signing their languages, which I think is just a neat thing to be able to do. Sometimes you don't have the ability to vocalize, but being able to do an equivalent sign language for your language is a really cool thing. And also because some people just can't speak for one reason or another, but having a means of communication unrelated to verbal speech, fantastic. I kind of wish they did that here. Obviously, in my own games, I would include signing, but you might also just leave it up to the players. If a player wants to create a character who does sign language, you know, I've seen people do that in stock 5e already anyway, so. Standard languages table lists languages that are widespread on D&D worlds in the material plane. The rare languages table lists languages that are more rarely known on these worlds. In each table, typical users of a language are mentioned. Let's talk about sign language, and they include common sign language as a standard language. Kind of makes sense for it to be its own thing. I do feel like more languages probably would have sign languages. But considering everyone in the world, for the most part, speaks common, having common sign language and no dwarvish sign language or elvish sign language, I guess it makes sense in the way that these worlds are designed. But I know I'll always do it differently in my own games. And I don't think I would ever make anyone pick sign language as a language option unless they were very specifically wanting to use up a language option for it for some reason. Pretty much the same languages here that you have anywhere. What am I talking about? Same languages here, with the exception of Common Sign Language, that you have in stock 5e. Pretty sure the lists are pretty much the same. And interestingly, they list the dialects under primordial instead of separating them out, which makes sense. Having them consider their own individual languages, like, I don't remember. I think Genasi would be given the dialect, but not the full primordial language. I could be remembering that wrong, or thinking of something from another resource or another TTRPG, but like maybe Pathfinder did something like that. I don't remember, but I do think it makes sense to list them here instead of as their own languages. For the same reason, I feel like sign language should be a subset of common and not separated from it. Feats. This section offers a collection of first level feats, which are special features not tied to a single class. At first level, your character gains a feat from the character's background. Each feat has a level. To take a feat, your level must equal or exceed the feat's level. That's interesting. Stock 5e, you didn't have feat levels. Every feat was considered effectively equal in that regard, even though they very clearly were not all equal. Prerequisites, that's something that they didn't have a ton of in stock 5e feats. You would have some that have prerequisites, but the vast majority did not. And repeatable. You can take more than once. I think that's a good tag to have on it instead of having it be buried in the description. So let's look over these real quick. Alert. When you roll initiative, you add your proficiency bonus to the roll. That's new to the alert feat. I think that's a cool benefit that you will always get. So that's pretty cool. And initiative swap. Immediately after you roll initiative, you can swap your initiative with the initiative of one willing ally in the same combat. You can't make the swap if you or the ally is incapacitated. So right at the beginning, if you have the alert feat, you can trade initiative with someone else that is willing and an ally. That's pretty cool. That is very different from what alert does in stock 5e. Alert, I believe, gives you... doesn't do anything with initiative. It's related to awareness. Let's bring this up here. It does have a bonus to initiative. Just a flat 5 bonus. But you also can't be surprised while conscious, and creatures don't gain advantage for being unseen by you. The initiative focus of the new version makes it a little bit less niche than these features, but it is a shame that these are not in there. I would be interesting to see if they do a higher level feat, maybe, or maybe a feat with a prerequisite of alert or something that gives those benefits. But yeah, this does feel pretty potent. The bonus is obviously a lot less potent because you're not just getting a flat 5, but at higher levels, you do get a +6 from your proficiency. So it ends up being better in the long run. But early on, it's a smaller increase. But any increase to your initiative feels good to have. And then the initiative swap is just a cool feature. I think that's really cool to be able to do that. Crafter. Gain tool proficiency with 3 different artisan's tools of your choice. Whenever you buy a non-magical item, you receive a 20% discount on it. And when you craft an item using the tool with which you have tool proficiency, the crafting time is reduced by 20%. That's cool. I'm curious to see with this discount if they're going to have more focus on economy in One D&D, because any TTRPG economy is just going to be a bunch of nonsense where the values of things do not add up. But it would be interesting to see if they changed that up to make it a little bit more logical. And then they have a focus on crafting here. Obviously, the whole thing is called Crafter. But again, hoping for more focus on those tool proficiency uses. Here, they're reducing crafting time. Stock 5e crafting is notoriously terrible. I really hope that One D&D has some good crafting rules. Like how feats seem to have passive and active traits. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I think just look at these two. I think that they're laying a good groundwork for what feats can be. Healer. Battle Medic. If you have a healer's kit, you can expend one use of it to and tend to a creature within 5 feet of you as an action. That creature can expend one of its hit dice and then roll that die. This creature regains a number of hit points equal to the roll plus your proficiency bonus. So they get to do their hit die, but they also get your proficiency bonus as an increase to the hit points recovered. So you can actually use it to properly heal people, which the healer feat already gave you some means to do that. I know I've had players who have used the healer's feat to pretty great results. So it's cool to see that legacy continued through the Battle Medic feature of it. Then healing rerolls. Whenever you roll a die to determine the number of hit points you restore with a spell or with this feat's Battle Medic benefit, you can re-roll the die if it rolls a 1, and you must use the new roll. So, similar to the Halfling luck, except this is with healing. If you get a 1 on your roll for healing with a spell or with this feature, you can re-roll it. So it can save you from those unfortunate healing rolls. Potentially. You could still roll another 1, but... well, actually, whenever you roll a die, it says you must use the new roll, but whenever you roll a die to determine the number of hit points, you can re-roll the die if it rolls a 1, which would suggest no matter what, when healing with a spell or with the Battle Medic benefit, you cannot get a 1. You will always keep re-rolling until you don't get a 1. Difference is that the healer feat on stock 5e is that you can only use it on a creature once per short rest. That was the limitation I saw people having. I had in fact, Dark Tower, you might have been in the group that I'm thinking of where the healer feat was used. I think there might have even been multiple characters in the party that had it, but the problem is once someone has been healed by it once, they can't be healed by it again, even if it's another person healing them or whatever the case is. So, yeah, this definitely makes it a more reasonable feature. And since it's based on hit dice, that gives more usage of hit dice, which is also a benefit, right? I feel like hit dice are something that is largely unused as well. Obviously, anytime someone takes a short rest, they can use them, but a lot of the time, there's not a lot of need unless you're playing a particularly tough campaign where you take a lot of damage. Also relies on you being in a party that doesn't have a lot of healing options. If you have people who are throwing healing at you all the time, then you're never going to use your hit dice. So this kind of gives more usage of that. And it also just the idea for non-magic healing, making it a little bit more viable, I think that's fantastic. Lucky. I am excited to see what they've done here. Because Lucky is, I think, kind of pretty famously in Stock 5e incredibly powerful. And for that reason, a lot of people don't allow it at their tables. So I'm interested to see if there's a difference to it here. You have a number of luck points equal to your proficiency bonus, another tying to that proficiency bonus, which is great. You can spend the points on the benefits below, and you regain your expended luck points in your official long rest. Advantage gives you, immediately after you roll a d20 for a d20 test, you can spend 1 luck point to give yourself advantage on the roll. That's interesting wording. It's specifically giving you advantage. It's not giving you a free reroll, like features like the halfling luck doesn't give you advantage. It gives you a reroll. Since it gives you advantage, that lets you counteract disadvantage. It also lets you it specifically doesn't allow you to stack this with another source of advantage. So if this were just a reroll for spending 1 luck point, you could have advantage and also still get a reroll on top of that. I think this is the way to go. I don't remember if Lucky was worded in that way. Let me check real quick. You can spend 1 luck point when an attack roll is made. Hold on, what am I looking for? You can choose to spend 1 of your luck points after you roll the die, but before the outcome is determined. You choose which of the d20s is used for the attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So, yeah, it was a reroll, basically. Better than a reroll, because usually those rerolls are worded in such a way that you have to use the newer result. You can't choose. Lucky is incredibly powerful in Stock 5e because you get the choice of the two, and it can be stacked with advantage or disadvantage, which leads to confusing scenarios and stuff like that. But this lays it out much more clearly. It tempers it a little bit, I feel like. I think it's a better take on it. And they're also tying it into a proficiency bonus. So like a lot of these other features, it is scaling with you as you level. Other benefit, disadvantage. When a creature rolls a d20 for an attack roll against you, you can spend a luck point to impose disadvantage on that roll. After seeing advantage, this is clearly what I expected it to be. And for the same reasons, I think it works out pretty well. This still a potent feat, but I think they've tempered it well by changing the wording. All right, Magic Initiate. It's repeatable, but you have to pick a different spell list each time. So you can't get new spells of, like, you can't keep getting arcane spells, as an example. But you choose Arcane, Divine, or Primal, and get 2 cantrips from that spell list, and a first level spell from that spell list that is always prepared. You cast it once without a spell slot, and regain the ability to cast it that way with a long rest. And like other similar features, you can cast it with spell slots as well. Again, I think that's fantastic. And you can choose your spellcasting ability. That makes perfect sense. I could have easily seen them tying it to, like, if it's Divine, it's Charisma, if it's Primal, it's Wisdom, and if it's Arcane, it's Intelligence. That would have been... I would have seen a logic to it, but it would have been unfortunate, because it would mean, because you're taking Arcane, even if you're a druid who uses Wisdom for their normal spells, these spells in particular would be of a different ability score, which would be just annoying to deal with. This is a much better design. On whenever you gain a new level, you can replace one of the spells you chose from this feat with a different spell of the same level from the chosen spell list. That's really cool too. The ability to trade out your spells, so you're not 100% locked in when you take the feat. But otherwise, it's pretty similar to how it works normally. It's just in the stock 5e, you would pick from a class spell list. Here they've got these more general spell lists, which is better in my mind. Musician gives you tool proficiency with 3 musical instruments, similar to Crafter giving you 3 artisan's tools. You get 3 instruments here. Inspiring song. After you finish a short rest or a long rest, you can play a song on a musical instrument with which you have tool proficiency and give inspiration to allies who hear the song. The number of allies you can affect in this way equals your proficiency bonus. That's pretty good. I think that's a really cool way of designing that feat. And anything that I feel like in stock 5e, inspiration is incredibly underutilized. Even in my own games, I am guilty of kind of ignoring inspiration, not because of a choice to ignore it, but just because it's otherwise left up to the DM to determine when people gain inspiration, and how are you going to dictate that, right? Like, the suggestions in the books are, it's like, yeah, when they're role-playing their character. It's like, if I gave out inspiration, someone was role-playing, anytime someone was role-playing their character well, I would be giving inspiration constantly, right? Other than that, there's not really any guidelines to giving inspiration. In previous games, I would just give free inspiration at the start of every session. But even that, it's something that's forgotten so easily. So having them playing with inspiration more in various features and feats like this, I think is fantastic. Savage Attacker. You've trained to deal particularly damaging strikes. When you take the attack action and hit a target with a weapon, as part of that action, you can roll the weapon's damage dice twice and use either roll against the target. You can use this benefit only once per turn, but you can do it every turn. So you have this ongoing benefit of being able to roll your damage twice. Basically, you can look at it almost like getting advantage on your damage roll, even though that's not a thing. Mechanically, it functions similarly. That's cool. So if you're, I could see quite a benefit to that. Always going to be, always going to have opportunity for pretty good damage output from at least one of your attacks every turn. And even as it is, you can still roll badly on both rolls, but there is the opportunity for it to be a better result, and I think that's cool. Skilled. It is repeatable. You have exceptionally broad learning. Does Savage Attacker stack with a critical hit? Does it stack with a critical hit? I don't think it would stack with a critical hit, but if you had a critical hit, now they might change it in one D&D. I would have to see if they have anything about that here. But with stock 5e, right? It's yeah, well, I think you would roll 2 sets of dice effectively. Right? Like, you wouldn't just mass roll 4 dice and just pick the best out of those 4. I think you would, roll 2 sets of 2 effectively, and pick which of those you feel would be better. Because otherwise, it is just a huge boost for your critical damage that functions differently from how it does for non-critical attacks effectively. So But yeah, skilled is repeatable, and it gives you proficiency in 3 skills. So you could, assuming the same rate of being able to pick feats as in stock 5e, you could very quickly have every skill proficient on a character with this, because you're getting 3 every 4 levels or so, in addition to what you start with and all of that. Like you could be a crazy skill junkie with this because it's repeatable. Tavern Brawler, I'm excited for this one. I love the idea of grappling and improvised weapons and all that stuff. So let's see here. Enhanced Unarmed Strike. When you hit with your Unarmed Strike and deal damage, you deal bludgeoning damage equal to 1d4 plus your strength modifier instead of the normal damage of an Unarmed Strike. I'm assuming same with the stock 5e, it would be 1 plus your strength modifier normally. Which I think this is in line with what Tavern Brawler already did. There was definitely a feat that did this. And I assume it was Tavern Brawler. Otherwise, they're mashing it into Tavern Brawler. Whenever you roll damage die for your unarmed strike, you can re-roll the die if it rolls a 1. You must use the new roll. So, again, you can never get a 1 on your damage die with your unarmed strikes with this. Because whenever you roll, you can re-roll. Shove. When you hit a creature with an unarmed strike as part of the attack action, on your turn you can deal damage to the target and also push it 5 feet away. You can use this benefit only once per turn. So you can't keep shoving a person even if you have 4+ attacks in a row. You can't keep just pushing them. Just 5 feet once per turn. Furniture as weapons. You can wield furniture as a weapon using the rules of the Great Club for small or medium furniture and the rules of Club for tiny furniture. That's interesting. I wonder if there is some plan to forego the improvised weapon rules in place of something like this. Alright. Tough. Hit point maximum increases by an amount equal to twice your character level. I think tough previously in stock 5e was just 1. Now it's effectively 2 per level. So that's interesting. Actually, I can double check that. Right over here, if I go to tough... Oh no, it was 2. So it's the same. I just remember that wrong. Rules glossary. Again, the part I am probably most excited to get to. It's also why this was the first section I looked at when this initially came out. But again, even then, I only briefly skimmed through it. So we're going to see... if term doesn't appear here, use this definition in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Okay. So, arcane spells. It's an interesting starting point. Draws on the ambient magic of the multiverse. Bards, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards harness this magic, as do artificers. For a partial list of arcane spells, see the spell list section later in this document. Okay, so this is just here, and there's probably also going to be a primal and divine spells blurb similar to this as well. Or, oh, this is just... hold on, what am I looking at? Yeah, never mind. Artisan's tools. I wonder why they redefine artisan's tools. Oh. Artisan's tools are a category of tool for which a character can gain tool proficiency. For a list of tools, see the 2014 Player's Handbook. But ignore the prices there. Those tools now cost 15 gold apiece. So they're homogenizing the prices of all the tools to 15 gold instead of the wide variety of values that the artisan's tools have in the original Player's Handbook. I think that's pretty good. It makes it feel like if we think back on the backgrounds, you would get a 50 gold allowance for your background equipment. And if your background is going to include a tool, based on the original player's handbook prices, you might not even be able to afford the tool. Or you could afford 100 of the tool. Because the variety in prices was such a large range. But now that they're all just 15, it makes approaching tools a lot more accessible. Creature type. Every creature in D&D, including every player character, has a special tag in the rules that identifies the type of creature they are. Most player characters are of the humanoid type. Again, I'm really interested in the fact that they say most player characters are of the humanoid type. I want to see them put out a playtest with non-humanoid character options. But that's something for the distant future, I am sure. Here they have the creature types in alphabetical order, and it's all the same creature types we know and love from normal D&D, normal stock 5e D&D. These types don't have rules themselves, but some rules in the game affect creatures of certain types in different ways. For example, the description of Cure Wounds specifies that the spell doesn't benefit a construct. D20 test. Here's something that we were talking about earlier with the natural ones, natural 20s. And what I like about this is that they are being more particular in their wording of things. They're being more specific, and they're making it clear what is what, which is always a good thing. D20 test is one of the three main D20 rolls of the game: ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. These are all considered D20 tests. If something in the game affects D20 tests, it affects all three of these rolls. The DM determines whether a D20 test is warranted in any given circumstance. To be warranted, a D20 test must have a target number no less than 5 and no greater than 30. Effectively, the reason for that is if it's above 30, it is an impossible roll. Now, mechanically speaking, 31 plus is not completely impossible. But most characters probably won't be able to achieve higher than a 30. Meanwhile, anything under 5 is basically a gimme, right? Like, you would, in most circumstances, automatically succeed unless you rolled a 1 on something that was a DC 3, 4, 3, 2, or 1. The only reason you wouldn't succeed those is if you have no modifier or a negative modifier and no proficiency bonus on that given roll, which absolutely possible. You could try to make a perception check, have no proficiency bonus, and have a -1 in your wisdom bonus, and you could roll a 2 and still fail anything below a 5. But the idea here being that if it is below a 5, pretty much anyone, unless something went horribly wrong, like just some freak accident, anyone could accomplish that. Now, rolling a 1, if you roll a 1 on the D20, the D20 test automatically fails regardless of any modifiers to the roll. In Stock 5e, that rule only applies to attack rolls. But here it applies to every roll. So in Stock 5e, if, say, a rogue who has expertise in stealth and has super high dexterity and, had an opportunity to make a stealth roll and they rolled a natural 1, but say they've got a +8, they would still have a 9. They would still, potentially succeed on some stealth checks. And, a bonus of 8 is like, let's see, if they had 5 in their dexterity +5 rather in the dexterity, and then expertise at level 1, that would be 4. So that would be giving them +9 actually. So the minimum that they would be able to roll on a stealth with that layout would be a 10. So they would be hitting the average for just a normal person with the worst possible case. But because of this rule, if they get that natural 1, they automatically fail. On the other end, rolling a natural 20 on a d20 test automatically succeeds. Now, if you're doing a skill check and the person rolls a natural 20, they were probably already going to succeed anyway, because if I, in my mind at least, if I have you making a roll, it's because it's a roll that you can succeed. What this opens up is rolls that it doesn't inherently open up to this, but through the right perception, this could open up to people giving rolls that you normally couldn't succeed, but you can only succeed if you roll a natural 20. Whereas it would otherwise be impossible. Which I feel like is the wrong way to look at it in general. I feel like, and maybe I'm kind of bad at explaining what I'm thinking in this in a sense, but in general, I'm only prompting someone to roll something if that character can succeed on that roll. I don't always, as the DM or GM, I'm not always fully aware of all of the benefits someone has to a roll, but in general, I know whether or not they're going to be able to succeed on this thing or not. And if it's something that they just can't do, I'm not going to have them roll for it. It does go on to say, rolling a 20 doesn't bypass limitations on the test, such as range and line of sight. Only bypasses only bonuses and penalties to the roll. So, you know, say you did need you know, you had disadvantage and you got a -5 and so on, that would make it impossible otherwise to succeed on whatever you're doing. If you roll that 20, you still succeed. Is kind of what this is saying with bonuses and penalties and so on. But it's not going to let you notice someone who is around a corner or, you know, 100 miles away just because you rolled a natural 20. You're still within the bounds of a strong level of logic there, which is good. They do, however, continue to go on with critical hits, specifically for attack rolls. Weapons and unarmed strikes have a special feature for player characters, critical hits. If a player... Weapons and unarmed strikes. So, spells cannot critical hit. That's an interesting thing. And I think that's probably a good thing to temper the power of some spells. Like, higher level spells throw out a lot of dice, and then when you critical hit and double the amount of dice, that's a lot of dice, just because you've criticaled. Nor does smite or sneak attack. That's a good point, because those aren't... Yeah, I guess those aren't the weapon, and they're not the unarmed strike. They're not the thing that is causing that initial strike. So that would also temper the kind of sudden nuke power you can get with a critical smite or sneak attack. Makes combat less swingy, which can be good or bad depending on the table. Yeah, I do feel like one thing in regard to that with smites, I would see people who rule it, and it's a common ruling based on the wording of the smite, where they would wait until they know the result of the attack before they determine if they're going to add their smite to it. So people would save their smites for critical hits, effectively. Because when you do that, then it goes from, 2d8 or whatever a smite is to 4d8. I think reducing swinginess in combat is always going to be a good thing. I think a lot of what they're doing with these rules, now that I'm getting a more full picture of it, is tempering certain aspects that would ultimately make things more swingy, for lack of a better term. And they're trying to level the playing field, I think, between things like casters and, smites and sneak attacks, stuff like that, that give you very sudden spikes in power. And trying to make that more in line with everything else, like weapon attacks and everything, to where you don't have it where it feels like, this fighter's gonna go in, this master of all weapons and every combat strategy and everything goes into fight, and the best he can do is he can attack a few times, right? Whereas a rogue comes in and just explodes a guy with an arrow, or a wizard comes in and just obliterates an entire battlefield, just destroys an entire army with a single spell. I feel like it's not going to completely balance things out there, but I think it's going to help. Critical hits only apply to PCs, and PCs and monsters no longer benefit from crits. That right there, a special feature for player characters. That's something that I was really thrown off by, and I think largely I was thrown off by it because we don't have access yet to those other playtest materials that would respond in a way to this change in the rules. I've seen people suggest that monsters are going to have features and things like that kind of counteracts that, right? Kind of plays into giving them certain features or power and ability that they didn't have previously to make up for the lack that they can't critical hit, so that the DM would have more control over when and how these spikes in power on the NPC's side occurs, as opposed to players who are still kind of tied into the critical hits being their sudden surge of power. If a player rolls a 20 for an attack roll with a weapon or an unarmed strike, the attack is also a critical hit, which means it deals extra damage to the target. You roll the damage dice of the weapon or unarmed strike a second time and add the second roll as extra damage for the target. So that right there, that wording specifically, is the part that says smites and sneak attack don't get critical damage, because it you roll the damage dice of the weapon or unarmed strike, and the sneak attack is a part of the attack, sure, but it's not a part of the weapon. It's not part of the unarmed strike. Similarly with the smite, it's not part of the weapon, it's not part of the unarmed strike. It is part of the attack, but that doesn't include it in the critical hit rules. And then they've got an example here. Pretty straightforward. If your weapon unarmed strike has no damage dice, it deals no extra damage on a critical hit. So if your unarmed strike is just a basic 1 plus your strength mod, it's not a die, so it does no extra damage on a critical hit, which is unfortunate. I think I would still rule that as, yeah, sure, I'll let you do an extra point of damage for your critical hit. But I don't know, maybe there is something to unarmed strikes that we'll see down the line where they're not just 1 plus strength modifier. I'm also curious to see if there are going to be weapons in the equipment for 1D&D that don't have damage dice. That would be curious to see. Divine spells, just like we had at Arcane at the top. Gaming set are a category of tool. So it looks like just another change in the prices to make all gaming sets cost 1 gold. Again, makes these toolkits more approachable, since you don't have to consider different prices for different sets. Grappled is now a condition. It wasn't previously. It was just a thing that was kind of anomalous that could occur. Your speed is 0 and can't change. That's a good thing. A bit of extra wording to put in there. When you're grappled, you can't get a boost or anything that would alter your speed because your speed is 0 and can't change. You have disadvantage on the attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. That's great. Previously, being grappled just means you couldn't move away from the attacker. You were stuck sharing the same space as them. But now you also get disadvantage on attacking people other than the person grappling you, which makes grappling a little bit more useful. Previously, it was at its best when paired with certain feats, like being able to pin people to give them a restrained condition, or knocking people prone and then grappling them so that they couldn't stand up, which would then make it easier to hit them if you were hitting them up close. So it was a kind of a more niche way of trying to control the battlefield. This makes it more generally useful, I feel like. The grappler can drag or carry you, but the grappler suffers the slowed condition. That's another one that I think is a new condition. We'll have to see down the line here. Unless you are tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller than the target. If you're tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller, they can just move you without the slowed condition. That's a cool note for them to throw on there. And when grappled, you can make a dexterity or saving throw against the grapple's escape DC at the end of each of your turns. So that also makes grappling less like all-encompassing, right? Because previously, like if something grabbed you, you had to use an action to try to break the grapple. I would hope that maybe that's still an option, but now not needing that to be a thing, kind of putting it more in line with other similar condition bestowing effects, where you can continue to roll at the end of each of your turns to try to break free of it, I think makes sense. It also makes it to where grappling someone isn't like the end all kind of tide turning change to a fight, right? Because there is still plenty of opportunity for them to break free. Condition also ends if the grappler is incapacitated or if something moves you outside the grapple's range without using your speed. Yep, so being forced away from the person grappling you if there's some sort of effect to push you away from one another or something, from some outside force, anything besides you trying to use your speed to get away from them can break the condition, which is already in line with how grappling already was. But here I think they've worded it in that kind of new way, right? Incapacitated, a change to that condition. Inactive, you can't take actions or reactions. Your concentration is broken. You can't speak. And if you're incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll. For the most part, pretty much in line with what incapacitated already was. I don't believe incapacitated would break concentration automatically previously. And it didn't affect the initiative previously. But the speechless and inactive are pretty much in line with what it already had. Inspiration. When you have inspiration, you can expend it to give yourself advantage on a d20 test. You must decide to do so before rolling the die. The main way a character gains inspiration is by rolling a 20 for a d20 test. So getting a natural 20 gains inspiration. DM can also award inspiration to a character who's done something that is particularly heroic or amusing. That's kind of how they suggested giving it in the stock 5e release, in the 2014 release. Only one at a time. You can never have more than one instance of inspiration. If you already have it, you can give inspiration to a player character in your group who lacks it. That's a good bit of kind of expanding on how that works. And if you still have inspiration when you start a long rest, you lose that inspiration. And I think that works with how they seem to be giving you much more opportunity to get inspiration, such as by rolling a natural 20. Long rest is an extended period of downtime, at least 8 hours long, during which the creature sleeps for at least 6 hours. Actually, before I go on to that, I did want to say, I think so far the changes to inspiration look good. I do hope that they come up with more ways to gain inspiration. Like, this is already big, the natural 20 thing. But if there's more ways to gain it, I think, like, not even a ton of more ways, but if there are feats or something that give you options to gain it, I think that would be neat. Even with what they have, it's not necessary. What they have is already a huge boon, just doing the natural 20 thing. That's wild. And I'm just glad that there is something besides the DM deciding to award it. So I think inspiration looks good. Long rest, extended downtime, at least 8 hours. At least, but not always, 8 hours. During which creature sleeps for at least 6 hours and performs no more than 2 hours of light activity. So what this suggests, it can be at least 8 hours long, but a long rest could be longer than 8 hours. But only 2 hours of that. Less than 2 hours, but at most 2 hours, can be light activity such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. So the rest would have to be either sleeping or just mindlessly existing and doing absolutely nothing. But you could sleep for a full, 16 hours like I've done in the recent past, in my real life. Just based on how this is worded here, at least. Benefits of the rest. At the end of a long rest, creature regains all lost hit points. Creature also regains spent hit dice, up to half the creature's total number of them, rounded down, minimum of 1. The creature can't benefit from more than one long rest in a 24-hour period, and a creature must have at least 1 hit point at the start of the rest to gain its benefits. So they pretty specifically lay out the circumstances to get the benefits right there. Interrupting the rest. If a long rest is interrupted by combat or 1 hour of walking, casting spells, or similar activity, the rest confers no benefit and must be restarted. However, if the rest was at least 1 hour long before the interruption, the creature gains the benefit of a short rest. So I saw some people talking and saying that this wording was unclear. There was a term thrown around called rest casting, I think. The idea being that you would cast a long-term ongoing spell at just before the end of a long rest, so that you would still get the benefits of a long rest. You would get all of your spell slots back. But say if you did like Mage Armor, which has a duration of 8 hours, you could cast that at the very end of your long rest, immediately regain your spell slot from casting it, but also get your 8 hours of mage armor. It obviously feels very janky. It feels like it's cheating the system, and in my own games, I wouldn't allow that. But the way that this is worded, as long as you're not spending an hour or more casting the spells, you could absolutely do that, because you get the benefits at the end of the long rest. And I bet if you looked at the class features, which they don't have here, but this doesn't go over gaining spell slots back. I bet if you looked at the class features, it would probably, for say, wizard or sorcerer, it would probably say that you get your spell slots back at the end of a long rest, just like you get everything else at the end of a long rest. Which would suggest that rest casting is a thing that you can do. But if anyone tried to do that, I would shut it down immediately, just because it feels against the intention, against the it just doesn't feel right, I guess, is ultimately what I'm trying to say about it. But I saw some people talking about this, saying that the wording is confused because they think that any casting or any similar activity would interrupt the rest, but the 1 hour only referred to walking, which is absolutely absurd. The interesting thing about this, actually, is that you could do a long rest with a cart, and you could be out walking for an hour, keeping watch during your long rest, and then just take the rest of the long rest on your cart and get a long rest on the move. Which you would need a pretty hefty party size to be able to do that, with everyone taking 1 hour of walking and keeping watch, but also not stopping at any point. But it could potentially be done, which is interesting, because I always think of long rest as being a very stationary thing. But yeah, the way this is worded opens it up to a bit more flexibility there. Let's see. The fact that any combat during any part of the rest makes nighttime ambushes more devastating, but I get why. Yeah, any combat fully interrupting the rest is interesting. So, you know, if you were unfortunate enough to have a fight occur in the later half of a rest, it would be pretty rough, because then to get your long rest, you would have to do the full thing from the beginning again, the full 8 hours. Yeah, I would be interested. I'm looking forward to them putting out more of these playtest materials, like some materials for classes and stuff, so that we can do a more proper full One D&D playtest with it at some point. But yeah, just the rules that they have here are very interesting already. Not already still. That doesn't make sense. Musical. Let's see. Parties will have to roll stealth checks while they rest. Hope no one has snoring as a flaw in their character sheet, right? Musical instruments now cost 20 gold apiece instead of, again, a variety depending on the instruments. Again, that consistency is nice, and it makes it easier to just drop in new tools, because all of the tools of certain types have the same prices. So you don't have to think about what the value would be on something new that you're homebrewing. That falls within that subset of equipment. Primal spells is just like the Arcane and Divine that we saw previously. The Slowed Condition. Again, I think that's a new condition. I don't think the 2014 release had Slowed. You must spend 1 extra foot of movement for every foot you move using your speed. So effectively, you're at half speed. Attack rolls against you have advantage because you're slower to react. And you have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. Again, because you're slower to react. I think them introducing more conditions like this is really, really smart. I think it's one of the benefits that a system like Pathfinder 2nd Edition has, is that there are a ton of conditions, but because of that, in spells and other features, they can reference these conditions as opposed to having to write out all of the effects in the spell or feature that causes it. Tool proficiency. If you have proficiency with a tool, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check you make that uses that tool. If you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with that check, you have advantage on the check too. That's something that I don't think Stock 5e did previously. That's something I've seen in other resources, and I think that works really well. So for example, if someone is doing a sleight of hand check with Thieves' Tools, and they have proficiency with Thieves' Tools and also Sleight of Hand, they would get advantage on their check. That makes a lot of sense to me because they're good at this thing from kind of on two fronts, effectively. This functionality means that you can benefit from both skill proficiency and tool proficiency on the same ability check. Tremor Sense. A creature with Tremor Sense can pinpoint the location of creatures and moving objects within a specific range, provided that the creature with Tremor Sense and anything it's detecting are both in contact with the same surface, such as the ground, a wall, or a ceiling, or the same liquid. Tremor Sense can't detect creatures or objects in the air, and Tremor Sense doesn't count as a form of sight. It's pretty good. So yeah, I don't think they had Tremor Sense previously. I think they had creatures that had features called Tremor Sense, but it wasn't an actual sense in the game in the 2014 release. So that's good. I mentioned it earlier. I wish 5e had more senses. I think it would open up more flexibility in approaching different challenges and more opportunity for what kind of quirks you can throw into a challenge as a DM. Aha, Unarmed Strikes. This is good. Unarmed Strikes is a melee attack that involves using your body to damage, grapple, or shove a target within your reach. Your bonus to hit with Unarmed Strike equals your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. On a hit, your Unarmed Strike causes one of the following effects of your choice. So an Unarmed Strike isn't just an attack for damage anymore. It can be, in which case it's 1 plus your strength modifier, bludgeoning damage, as before, but it can also be used to grapple. So a grapple isn't its own kind of independent anomalous thing anymore. It is an unarmed strike. Grapple's escape DC, which occurs at the end of the grappled target's turns. 8 plus your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. In line with everything else. As grapple is only possible if the target is no more than one size larger than you, and if you have free hand to grab the target. Cool. So the change here is that they're making it part of the unarmed strike. Everything else is pretty much 1-to-1 what it already was. And shove, similar to grapple, is no longer just kind of an anomaly. It's also part of an unarmed strike. To push target 5 feet away or knock the target prone. Yeah, you hit the target AC and the target is grappled. So yeah, you make your attack roll. If you hit, they become grappled. Kind of streamlines it a little bit since you don't have a contested check. You only have to have one roll happening. But then shove, which is interesting because I think shove was included as technically as an optional thing that could be included, but a lot of people had it included in their games anyway. Because why not? Similar to grapple, only possible if it's within the kind of that size threshold there. Yeah, I think this stuff looks good. I think making it part of the unarmed strike is makes sense. And similar to the other rules with grappling, I think it's a much more viable thing now, especially since it's an unarmed strike. You could just, you know, the more attacks you can do in a turn, the more opportunities you have to grab someone. Spell lists. There are now 3 main spell lists in the game: Arcane, Divine, and Primal. In future Unearthed Arcana articles, we'll show you how classes use these lists and how a class or subclass might gain spells from another list. But that suggests that it's really just these 3 lists. No more specific class-based spell lists. At least not in a general sense. It does mention they might gain some spells here and there in other ways, but this here goes through first level to support some of the races and feats in the document. This list currently includes spells only from the 2014 Player's Handbook. So these lists are going to be pretty short because it's only cantrips and first level spells. But yeah, you can right here you can see how they've split up Arcane, Divine, and Primal spells. I'm not going to go over all of these because it's a lot of different spells to go over, and you know, if you are interested in the specifics of the list, you know, you can look into it on your own time. I'm running this show here. Speaking of running this show, that is the end of the document. Overall, I think this is good. I think this is just like, not even talking about the spells here. The entire document, I think they have done some really good things. I think overall, I am on board with what One D&D is doing. I like the design style that they're going for in the character origins, and I will be interested to see more of the content that they put out following this in relation to One D&D. Kind of give it all my general thoughts as we've been going through. But yeah, overall, I like it. And I would be interested in talking some more with people off stream about this. If you're in my Discord or anything, you know, there's already been some discussion happening there, and if you happen to see me on Discord, I'm always open for chatting about this kind of stuff, because D&D is basically my life these days. So let me know. But that's gonna be about it for this. Let me see here. What am I doing? Let me go ahead and let me switch over here real quick. I would like to take a look and see here. Like I said, that's gonna be about it for this stream. We're gonna call it quits, but in the meantime, just for fun, I think what I'm gonna go ahead and do is let's see. What do I want to do here? What do I want to do? Uh, I've recently had it explained to me that raiding is a thing that people do on Twitch. So I'm gonna pick someone who I think is super cool, and we're gonna go over there. We're gonna say hi, or just watch and have fun. So we're gonna go ahead and jump over to Novaswarm. I don't know how much longer they're going to be going, but currently they're playing Genshin Impact. Looks like Novaswarm's Lyra is over there.